They called me the innovation blocker. They erased my name from meetings, mocked the systems I'd maintained for years like I was just corporate deadweight. But they didn't know I was the backbone holding everything together. When our CFO tried to bypass me for a $251 million shortcut deal, I locked every exit door legally. This time, there was no reset button. They wanted to play hardball with the wrong person. I didn't just know the system, I owned it, and they were about to learn exactly what that meant. My name is Rachel Dawson, and I'd been the senior systems architect at Havenbrook Dynamics for 7 years. 7 years of building, maintaining, and perfecting the infrastructure that kept our billion-dollar SaaS company running like clockwork. That Monday morning started like any other black coffee. 2 monitors glowing, code reviews queued up until I noticed something off. My name was missing from the Monday Ops call agenda. At first, I thought it was an oversight. These things happen when you're dealing with 200 employees across 3 time zones. But when I checked the distribution list, my email had been deliberately removed. After 7 years of never missing a single operations meeting, I'd been quietly erased. The previous Friday, our board had brought in a new CFO, Brent Calder, Harvard MBA, Goldman Sachs pedigree, and the kind of aggressive confidence that made you want to check your wallet after shaking his hand. He'd swept through the office like he owned the place, which technically he didn't. But try telling him that. His first all-hands presentation was all about burning stages and feeding the investor appetite. Every third sentence contained the word disruption. I'd sat in the back row, watching him pace the stage in his $2,000 shoes, promising to double our valuation within 18 months. The developers around me were eating it up, fresh graduates mostly, hired in the last expansion, who didn't remember the server meltdown of 2020 or the data breach scare that nearly killed us in 2021. They didn't know that the only reason we survived those crises was because of the orchestration framework I'd built from scratch. Tuesday's leadership sync was when Brent made his intentions crystal clear. I wasn't supposed to be in that meeting either, but old habits die hard. I'd set up the conference room's AV system 3 years ago and still had admin access to the calendar. I slipped in 2 minutes late, grabbed a seat by the door. "We need to accelerate," Brent was saying, his laser pointer dancing across a timeline that looked like it was drawn by someone who'd never written a line of code. "These legacy systems are holding us back. Compliance, documentation, all these safety nets their last decade's thinking." His eyes found me when he said holding us back. Not a glance, but a deliberate, sustained look that told everyone in the room exactly who he considered the problem. "Rachel," he said, though it sounded more like an accusation than a greeting, "I didn't expect you here. This is a strategic planning session. I'm responsible for the technical architecture that supports that strategy," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Thought I might be useful." He smiled the kind CEOs practice in mirrors. "Of course, but we're discussing high-level vision today. We'll loop in implementation teams when we're ready to execute." Implementation teams. After 7 years of being the chief architect, I'd been demoted to implementation in his mind. I stood up, gathered my laptop with deliberate calm. "I'll leave you to it then." As I reached the door, I heard him continue. "As I was saying, we can rebuild the entire infrastructure in 90 days with offshore developers at a third of the cost. All this proprietary complexity is just job security for people who can't adapt to modern development." My hand tightened on the door handle. Proprietary complexity. He was talking about my orchestration framework, the system that processed 8 million transactions daily without a hiccup. The system I'd spent 3 years perfecting, documenting every function, every dependency, every edge case. Walking back to my desk, I already knew what was coming. Brent wasn't just another MBA looking to make his mark. He was here to gut the technical infrastructure and replace it with whatever cheap solution would make the quarterly numbers look good for the next funding round. And I was the inconvenient expert who might point out why that was a terrible idea. The next few days confirmed my suspicions. My access to the development sandbox was revoked for security audit purposes. My code review permissions were transferred to a 24-year-old team lead who'd been with the company 6 months. My one-on-ones with the CTO were canceled indefinitely. They were slowly, methodically cutting me out of my own creation. But Brent had made one crucial mistake. He assumed that because he had the title and the board's backing, he had control. He didn't know about Clause 4C. The Phoenix Lake Retreat Center was supposed to be exclusive C-suite and board members only, but the catering company they'd hired, that was run by Marcus, my former colleague from my first startup. When he mentioned he'd be working the executive strategy session, I asked for a small favor, nothing illegal, just leaving a conference room door propped open during the lunch break. I arrived at 12:30, blending in with the catering staff refilling the coffee stations. The executives were scattered across the terrace, networking over salmon and Pinot Grigio. Their presentation materials were still up on the main screen, and Brent's laptop was open on the podium, displaying his infrastructure revolution roadmap. What I saw made my stomach drop. Phase 1. Eliminate legacy orchestration framework, 90 days. Phase 2. Migrate to offshore development team, Mumbai and Manila offices already contacted. Phase 3. Complete infrastructure rebuild using open source alternatives, estimated cost savings of $40 million annually. But that wasn't the worst part. The next slide showed the contracts already in negotiation. 3 development firms, all promising to deliver equivalent functionality at 20% of current operational costs. Brent had even included screenshots of our proprietary code, sent to these firms for evaluation purposes. My code, my architecture, 7 years of optimization and refinement, handed over to the lowest bidder like it was nothing more than technical debt to be eliminated. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, careful to capture every slide, every timeline, every contractor detail. Then I saw something that made me pause. A legal assessment memo in the corner of one slide, partially visible. I zoomed in with my camera. Intellectual property review indicates no significant obstacles to framework replacement. Employment contract standard. No unusual retention clauses identified. They'd done a legal review, but they'd missed something. 3 years ago, when I'd rebuilt the entire orchestration framework from scratch after a critical vulnerability was discovered, I'd negotiated something unusual into my contract renewal. The company had been desperate. We were 48 hours from a compliance audit that we would have failed without the new framework. I'd worked 90-hour weeks to save them. In exchange, I'd asked for something specific: joint ownership of the framework through my personal LLC, Arden Technologies. The company could use it freely, modify it, build on it, but any fundamental changes to the core architecture required my signature. It was buried in subsection 4C of the continuity clauses, wrapped in enough legal language that HR had probably skimmed right over it. But there was more to Clause 4C than just signature requirements. I'd insisted on a fail-safe if anyone attempted to bypass the framework's core functions without proper authorization. The system would enter what I'd called dormant compliance lockout. It wasn't malicious code or a backdoor. It was a legal safety mechanism, documented and approved, designed to prevent exactly what Brent was planning. The beauty was that it was completely legitimate. The system would simply refuse to operate outside its documented parameters without proper authentication from Arden Technologies. Every attempt to override it would be logged as a compliance violation, shortening the grace period before full lockout. I heard voices approaching the conference room and quickly slipped back into the hallway, joining a group of catering staff wheeling out empty serving carts. As we passed the executives returning from lunch, I kept my head down, just another invisible service worker in their high-powered world. Brent was holding court near the entrance, his voice carrying over the others. The old guard always resists change. They've built their little kingdoms, and they'll protect them at any cost. But disruption doesn't ask permission. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll have already transformed this company. One of the board members asked, "What about the technical team? Won't they push back?" Brent laughed. "The ones worth keeping will adapt. The others," he made a dismissive gesture. "There's a reason they call it dead weight. You cut it loose and suddenly you can fly." I wheeled my cart past them, close enough to smell Brent's cologne, something expensive and aggressive. He didn't even glance in my direction. I was already invisible to him, already cut loose in his mind. But he'd forgotten the first rule of engineering: never remove a component until you understand exactly what it does. And he definitely didn't understand what I'd built into that framework. Back in my car, I reviewed the photos I'd taken. The timeline was aggressive. They planned to start the transition in 2 weeks. The new devs would try to reverse engineer my code, probably fail, then attempt to bypass it entirely. And when they did, Clause 4C would activate. I drove home slowly, already planning my next moves. Brent thought he was playing chess, sacrificing pawns to protect his king, but he didn't realize I wasn't playing on his board anymore. I owned the board. The email arrived on a Thursday at 3:45 p.m., marked Urgent Transition Review Meeting, HR's favorite time slot, late enough that you couldn't spend the whole day dreading it, early enough that you'd leave the office in shock rather than anger. I walked into conference room B at 4 p.m. sharp. Jennifer from HR was there with her practiced sympathy face, alongside Tom Reeves, the legal counsel who usually handled terminations. No Brent, of course. He was too important to handle his own dirty work. "Rachel, please have a seat," Jennifer began, sliding a folder across the table. "As you know, Havenbrook Dynamics is undergoing a strategic restructuring to position ourselves for next phase growth." I didn't touch the folder. "You mean Brent wants me gone?" Tom shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer maintained her corporate smile. "This isn't personal, Rachel. Your position is being eliminated as part of a broader organizational efficiency initiative. My position, Senior Systems Architect, the person who built the infrastructure you're running on. Your contributions have been invaluable," Jennifer continued, reading from her script, "which is why we're offering a generous severance package, 3 months' salary, continued health benefits through the end of the year, and a positive reference for future opportunities." I finally opened the folder, standard termination agreement, non-compete clause, and there it was, a comprehensive IP transfer document. They wanted me to sign over any and all rights to work products created during my employment. "This is interesting," I said, pointing to page 7. "This retroactive IP assignment, it seems very thorough." Tom leaned forward. "Standard language. Just confirms that all work products remain company property, including work products created through independent contractor agreements." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "You've always been a full-time employee." "True, but Ardent Technologies LLC has been a contracted vendor for specific framework components. Check your records invoices filed quarterly for the last 3 years." Jennifer typed something into her laptop, frowning. "I don't show any vendor relationship under that name." Because it was managed directly through technical procurement, not HR, small vendor, specialized services. The CFO at the time, Richardson, approved it to maintain flexibility for framework updates. Tom was now furiously checking his phone, probably messaging someone in procurement. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was counting down. They'd find the records eventually. Everything was perfectly documented, filed, and paid. Ardent Technologies LLC had been receiving $3,500 monthly for framework maintenance and specialized updates. "Regardless," Jennifer pressed on, "your employment is being terminated effective immediately. We'll need your badge, laptop, and company devices." I reached into my bag and placed my badge and phone on the table. "The laptop's at my desk. I'll need to retrieve my personal items." "Security will escort you," she said, "and we'll need you to sign these documents before you leave." I picked up the pen, then paused. "I'll need a complete copy of my personnel file and all associated documentation, for my records." "We can email that." "No, hard copies. Now, it's my legal right to review all documents related to my termination before signing anything." Tom nodded at Jennifer, who left the room with barely concealed irritation. While we waited, I read through every line of the termination agreement. 40 minutes later, Jennifer returned with a box of papers. I went through them methodically, setting aside specific documents: my original employment contract, the amendment from 3 years ago, the quarterly invoices from Ardent Technologies. Tom watched with growing unease as the pattern became clear. This is all in order, I finally said, signing the basic termination agreement but leaving the IP transfer document untouched. I'll need my attorney to review this one. Complex situation with the vendor relationship. Rachel, Tom said carefully, what exactly does Arden Technologies own? I smiled for the first time since entering the room. Nothing that prevents Havenbrook from operating normally. As long as the framework isn't fundamentally altered without proper authorization, everything continues as usual. Think of it as a safety mechanism. That sounds like a completely legal contractual arrangement that your predecessor approved and the company has been honoring for 3 years. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Security was waiting outside Derek, who I'd helped recover his accidentally deleted family photos from his work computer last year. He looked apologetic as he walked me to my desk. I packed slowly, making sure to take only personal items while Derek watched uncomfortably. My emergency backup drives stayed in my bag, where they'd always been personal property, never connected to company systems. The framework documentation binders I left prominently on the desk. Let them figure out how to interpret 2,000 pages of technical specifications without the context only I possessed. As Derek walked me to the parking garage, he muttered, "This is bullshit. Rachel, everyone knows you keep this place running." "Not everyone," I replied, looking up at the executive floor windows. "But they're about to learn." At home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my personal laptop. The termination was effective immediately, but Arden Technologies LLC was still an active vendor. I logged into the framework monitoring system. My access was tied to the LLC, not my employee account. Everything was running smoothly. 8 million transactions processed today. 0 errors. Perfect uptime. I pulled up the Clause 4C documentation and reviewed the lockout protocols one more time. When triggered, the system would provide clear warning messages. It would explain exactly what was happening and why. It would even offer a resolution path, obtain proper authorization from Arden Technologies LLC. It was all completely above board. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply protecting my intellectual property rights as legally established in a contract they'd signed. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah in DevOps. "Heard what happened. This is insane. What do we do when things break?" I typed back, "Follow the documentation. Everything's there." What I didn't add was that the documentation wouldn't help them when they tried to do what Brent was planning, because you can't bypass a system when the system itself owns the locks. 2 weeks after my termination, Brent's master plan went into motion. I learned about it through LinkedIn former colleagues, posting about exciting transformations and revolutionary partnerships at Havenbrook. The announcement was classic corporate speak, but the numbers were real: a $251 million growth acceleration deal with Cortel Capital. The press release was full of promises: modernized infrastructure, streamlined operations, best-in-class technology stack. They were going to transform Havenbrook from a reliable SaaS provider into a hyper-growth unicorn. The condition: complete the infrastructure overhaul in 90 days to meet Cortel's aggressive expansion timeline. Sarah called me that evening, whispering like she was in a spy movie. "Rachel, you need to know what's happening. They brought in 3 dev teams from Mumbai, 25 people who've never seen our codebase before. Brent's calling it Operation Lightning Strike." "How's that working out?" "They're trying to build a bypass, something called a bridge protocol, to route around your framework entirely. The lead dev keeps saying it's simple. Just redirect the traffic flow." I almost laughed. Redirect the traffic flow, like my framework was just a series of pipes they could replumb. They didn't understand that every transaction touched 17 different validation points, each one interconnected with compliance checks that took me 2 years to perfect. "Sarah, you still have my personal email?" "Yeah." "Document everything, every change they make, every shortcut they implement. CC yourself on all of it." "Why, what's going to happen?" "Just document it, and Sarah makes sure you're not on duty the weekend they try to deploy." The first signs of trouble appeared on week 3. I was monitoring the system logs from my home office, my LLC vendor access still intact, completely legal, when I noticed the error patterns. Small things at first: timeout warnings, memory leaks. The new developers were hammering at the framework, trying to force their bridge protocol through pathways that weren't designed for that kind of traffic. Each failed attempt triggered a compliance warning, not visible to users, but logged meticulously in the security audit system. Error 401, unauthorized modification attempt. Error 403, operational continuity required. The framework was doing exactly what I'd designed it to do, protecting itself from unauthorized changes. By week 4, they were getting desperate. The logs showed increasingly aggressive attempts to override the core functions. They tried SQL injections, thinking they could bypass the framework at the database level. They attempted to clone the entire system onto shadow servers. They even brought in a specialist from Silicon Valley, some hotshot who claimed he could crack any legacy system in 72 hours. He lasted 36 before rage quitting, according to Sarah. What they didn't realize was that every failed attempt was shortening the grace period. Clause 4C included a progressive security protocol. The more you attacked the system, the less tolerant it became. It was like an immune response. Each violation made the next lockout threshold lower. The fatal moment came at 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was watching Netflix, laptop beside me with the monitoring dashboard open, when the critical alert popped up. Someone had tried to execute a force override using fabricated credentials. They'd attempted to spoof Arden Technologies' digital signature. That wasn't just a violation, that was attempted fraud. The framework's response was immediate. Every screen in Havenbrook's operations center would be displaying the same message. Continuity Clause 4C activated. Unauthorized modification detected. Security protocol engaged. System lockout in 145959s. 15 hours. That's all they had to obtain proper authorization from Arden Technologies LLC, or the entire system would enter dormant compliance lockout. My phone exploded with calls, unknown numbers, former colleagues, even a few board members who'd somehow gotten my personal cell. I let them all go to voicemail. At 11:47 p.m., an email arrived from Tom Reeves in legal. Ms. Dawson, we need to discuss the current situation immediately. Please respond at your earliest convenience. I waited until midnight, then replied, Mr. Reeves, I'm no longer an employee of Havenbrook Dynamics. Any business matters should be directed to Arden Technologies LLC during normal business hours. Our offices are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Of course, Arden Technologies didn't have an office. It had a P.O. box and a Google Voice number that went straight to voicemail. The countdown had begun. Somewhere in Havenbrook's gleaming offices, Brent was about to learn that his $251 million shortcut had just hit a very expensive wall. And unlike his PowerPoint presentations, this timeline wasn't negotiable. The framework didn't care about his Harvard MBA or his Goldman Sachs pedigree. It only cared about one thing: proper authorization from the owner. Me. The next 10 days were a masterclass in corporate chaos. I watched it unfold through the system logs, Sarah's frantic texts, and the increasingly desperate voicemails piling up on my phone. Day 1 after the countdown started, the dashboard widgets began freezing randomly. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. Just little hiccups, a revenue chart that wouldn't refresh, a user metric that displayed last week's data. The kind of glitches that made executives nervous but didn't seem critical. The dev teams worked through the night, convinced they could debug their way out. They didn't understand they weren't facing bugs. The framework was incrementally reducing functionality, exactly as documented in Clause 4C's security protocols. Each unauthorized access attempt triggered a micro-suspension of non-critical services. Day 3. The API response times started degrading. Queries that usually took milliseconds now took full seconds. Customer-facing services were still running, but the back-end analytics that Brent needed for his Cortel presentations were crawling. Sarah texted me at 2 a.m. They're losing their minds. Brent just screamed at the entire dev team, called them incompetent. 2 people quit on the spot. Day 5. The billing system entered a validation loop. Not broken that would have been legally problematic, just extremely thorough. Every transaction required 17 confirmation steps instead of 3. Customers could still pay, but it took 20 minutes to process a single credit card. The support tickets were piling up. Twitter was starting to notice. Hat at Havenbrook Down was trending locally. Day 7. An emergency board meeting was called. Sarah managed to record part of it, Brent's voice, high and strained, insisting this was industrial sabotage. The general counsel's response was barely audible but devastating. She owns the rights. We verified it. This is our mistake. That evening, a new email arrived, not from Tom Reeves, but from Margaret Walsh, the board chair herself. Ms. Dawson, we need to resolve this situation. Please provide your terms for restoration of full service. I didn't respond. Arden Technologies LLC was a vendor, not a charity. They could submit a formal service request through proper channels. Day 8. They tried everything. The Mumbai team attempted to build a parallel system from scratch. The Silicon Valley consultant returned with 3 colleagues, billing $900 per hour. They even brought in someone from the NSA's former cyber division. Nothing worked, because they were fighting the wrong battle. This wasn't about breaking encryption or finding backdoors. The framework was operating exactly as designed, following legally documented protocols that they'd agreed to. The countdown timer was now showing less than 72 hours. Every monitor in the operations center displayed it. They couldn't hide it, couldn't remove it, couldn't even cover it up. It would just appear on another screen. Day 9. The first real crack appeared, not in the system in Brent. According to Sarah, he'd stopped coming to the office. His assistant said he was working remotely on strategic solutions, but everyone knew he was hiding. The board had started asking hard questions about due diligence. How had he missed this? Why hadn't legal caught it? Who approved bypassing the technical team's input? The offshore developers had given up entirely. Half had already been reassigned to other projects. The other half were just collecting hourly fees while pretending to debug code they didn't understand. That afternoon, something interesting happened. The framework logged an access attempt using my old employee credentials. Someone was trying to impersonate me in the system. The attempt triggered an immediate security escalation. The countdown jumped forward by 2 hours. The system's response message was particularly satisfying. Identity fraud detected, countdown accelerated, current time to lock out 47 hours, 13 minutes. Day 10. Panic had transformed into desperation. Tom Reeves sent a formal letter via courier actual paper. Signature required offering me a consulting contract, $1 million to return as an emergency contractor and resolve the situation. I sent back a single page. Arden Technologies LLC appreciates your interest in our services. Our standard rate for emergency infrastructure restoration is $50,000 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 100 hours. Additionally, full ownership rights to the framework must be formally transferred to Arden Technologies, with Havenbrook licensing it back at market rates. Please note, these terms are only available while the system remains in warning status. Once full lockout occurs, restoration will require complete infrastructure rebuild at significantly higher costs. The counter on my monitor showed 31 hours, 47 minutes. They'd wanted to save $40 million annually by eliminating my framework. Now they were facing a $5 million emergency fee just to keep their company running, and that was if they responded in time. The billing loops were getting longer. The API delays were becoming unbearable. Major customers were starting to ask questions about service stability. Cortel Capital was making concerned noises about the deal conditions. Sarah's last text of the day was short. Brent's assistant just quit, said she couldn't work for someone who hides in crisis. Legal team is in full meltdown, complete chaos. I turned off my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and watched the countdown tick lower. They'd called me the innovation blocker, the dead weight, the legacy problem that needed eliminating. Now they were learning what happens when you remove the foundation while standing on the building. The framework didn't care about egos or corporate politics. It just followed the rules. Rules they'd ignored, rules they'd dismissed, rules that were about to lock them out of their own company. The final 14 hours played out like a corporate thriller nobody wanted to watch, but couldn't look away from. I turned my phone back on at 8 a.m., finding 137 missed calls and twice as many text messages. The voicemail box was full. Sarah had sent updates throughout the night. Emergency board meeting at 3 a.m. Brent tried to blame you for sabotage. Board told him to shut up or get out. At 9:15 a.m., with the countdown showing 6 hours and 43 minutes, Margaret Walsh called directly. I actually answered this one. Rachel, this is Margaret. I'm putting you on speaker with the entire board. Ms. Walsh, I'm not an employee. Any business discussions should go through. Cut the shit, Rachel. That was Douglas Kim, the most senior board member. We fucked up. Brent fucked up. We need to fix this. What do you want? I sent my terms to legal yesterday. $5 million in framework ownership, that's extortion. That's market rate for emergency disaster recovery. You should know you've paid IBM twice that for less critical interventions. Silence. Then Brent's voice, shaky and desperate. This is illegal. She planted a virus. Mr. Calder? I interrupted calmly. Every line of code in that framework is documented and was approved by your legal team 3 years ago. The security protocols are clearly outlined in Section 47 of the technical specifications, the same specifications your new developers apparently never read. You can't hold the company hostage. I'm not holding anything. The system is operating exactly as designed and contracted. You attempted to bypass legal security measures. You tried to spoof digital signatures. That's not my virus. Mr. Calder, that's your incompetence. Someone muted Brent's mic, cutting off his response. Margaret's voice returned, measured but tense. The board is prepared to accept your terms with one modification, $3 million up front, $2 million upon successful restoration. No modifications, $5 million in escrow within 2 hours, or the offer expires. Full framework ownership transfer signed and notarized. 10-year licensing agreement at standard enterprise rates. Rachel, be reasonable. I hung up. At 10:47 a.m., the countdown hit 5 hours. New symptoms emerged. The reporting database began returning randomized results. Not wrong enough to be obvious, just different enough to make every executive question every number. Was revenue really up 3% or down 5%? Were user signups actually increasing? Nobody could tell anymore. Tom Reeves sent an email at 11:23 a.m. Escrow account established. $5 million deposited. Documents attached for signature. I reviewed every line. Clean transfer of framework ownership to Arden Technologies. Licensing agreement giving Havenbrook full usage rights at enterprise standard rates, $75,000 monthly. Indemnification against any claims of sabotage or malpractice. Even a non-disparagement clause that went both ways. I signed digitally at 12:07 p.m., 3 hours and 52 minutes remaining. But I didn't send the restoration codes yet. Instead, I sent a new message. Terms accepted. However, restoration requires on-site verification to ensure no permanent damage has occurred. I'll need building access and a workstation. The response was immediate. Access granted. Security will be expecting you. I took my time driving to the office. Let them sweat a little longer. The countdown would be at 2 hours when I arrived enough time to fix things, but not enough to relax. Walking through those familiar doors felt different now. I wasn't an employee. I was a vendor. A very expensive vendor who owned the code their entire company ran on. The operations center looked like a war zone. Empty pizza boxes, coffee cups everywhere. Developers slumped at their desks. Everyone turned when I entered. A mixture of relief and resentment on their faces. Brent was there, shirt untucked, hair a mess, his usual swagger completely gone. He couldn't even make eye contact. Ms. Dawson, Margaret Walsh stood from the center console. Thank you for coming. I nodded and walked to the primary terminal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Sudo. System Keel Arden Auth. Verify Enter Authorization Code. Verification successful. Initiate restoration YHN. Y. Restoring full functionality KI. The countdown timer disappeared. Dashboards refreshed with accurate data. APIs resumed normal response times. The billing system cleared its validation queue in seconds. 14 hours of chaos. Undone in 14 seconds. It's done, I announced. Full functionality restored. You'll find detailed invoices for the licensing agreement in your inbox. Brent finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. How did I protect my intellectual property using completely legal means? Very carefully. Mr. Calder, the same way I built that framework with attention to every detail you thought was irrelevant. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh. And Brent. You might want to check with legal before you try any more shortcuts. Arden Technologies will be monitoring all framework modifications going forward. Any unauthorized changes will trigger immediate suspension of the license. The realization hit him visibly. They'd paid $5 million to get their system back, and now they'd be paying me $75,000 monthly forever. The framework he'd tried to eliminate now owned them. That's business. Margaret Walsh cut him off, her voice cold. Mr. Calder, please clean out your office. The board will be conducting a thorough review of your decision-making process. As I walked past his stunned face, I couldn't resist one final comment. You called me dead weight, told everyone I was blocking innovation. Turns out I wasn't blocking anything, I was holding it all together. The boardroom erupted the moment I left. Through the glass walls, I could see Brent gesticulating wildly, his face red, spittle flying as he shouted at the board members. Margaret Walsh stood perfectly still, her expression carved from stone, letting him rant himself into deeper trouble. I paused at Sarah's desk, where she and the remaining dev team were staring at their monitors in disbelief. Everything was working, perfectly, better than before. Actually, I'd pushed a few performance optimizations while I was in the system. Rachel, Sarah whispered, what did you just do? I enforced a contract, nothing more, nothing less. Behind us, the boardroom door slammed open. Brent stormed out, his face contorted with rage. He saw me and charged over, finger pointing like a weapon. You think you've won? His voice cracked, high and desperate. You just destroyed a $251 million deal Cortel is going to pull out. The company will tank. Everyone here will lose their jobs because of your petty revenge. The entire floor had gone silent, watching the meltdown of a man who'd walked in 6 weeks ago like he owned the place. Mr. Calder, I kept my voice professionally calm. Cortel invested in a company with stable infrastructure. You nearly destroyed that infrastructure with your shortcuts. If they pull out, it won't be because the system works. It'll be because you tried to break it. I'll sue you. Sabotage, corporate espionage, theft of... Brent, Margaret Walsh's voice cut through his tirade like a blade. Security is waiting at your office. You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings. He spun to face her. You can't be serious. The board hired you to increase valuation, not trigger a complete system failure that cost us $5 million plus ongoing licensing fees. Your termination paperwork is being prepared. This is insane. Brent's carefully styled exterior had completely crumbled. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands shaking. She held us hostage. She executed a legal contract that you failed to identify during your due diligence, Douglas Kim interrupted from the boardroom doorway. A contract that was public record in our own procurement system. Your lightning strike nearly flatlined the entire company. Brent looked around wildly, searching for an ally, but found only averted eyes and hidden smirks. The young developers he'd brought in had already started packing their laptops. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. The Cortel deal. We'll proceed, Margaret announced. I've already spoken with their CEO. They're actually impressed that our infrastructure has such robust protection mechanisms. They're viewing it as a security feature, not a liability. That broke him. Brent's legs seemed to give out, and he dropped into a nearby chair, head in his hands. This wasn't supposed to happen. The math was perfect. 40 million in savings, streamlined operations. Your math forgot to account for the human element, I said. The people who actually built what you were so eager to destroy. Security arrived 2 guards who gently but firmly helped Brent to his feet. As they escorted him toward his office, he turned back one last time. You're going to regret this, Rachel, when the market finds out what you did. What I did is public record, I replied. I protected my intellectual property through legal means after being wrongfully terminated. Any competent analysis will show that you created this crisis through negligence and hubris. He opened his mouth to respond, but the security guards were already guiding him away. The last I saw of Brent Calder, he was being led into an elevator, his Harvard MBA and Goldman Sachs pedigree worth exactly nothing. Margaret Walsh approached me, extending her hand. Ms. Dawson Rachel, the board owes you an apology. We should have consulted you before making such drastic infrastructure decisions. I shook her hand briefly. The board made a business decision based on incomplete information. Now you have complete information. Would you consider returning as CTO? Perhaps the position is suddenly available. No, the response was immediate and final. Arden Technologies is doing quite well as an independent vendor. I have other clients interested in my frameworks. She nodded, understanding. The licensing agreement, $75,000 monthly, it's significant. It's less than half of what you were paying me in salary and benefits. Consider it a discount for a long-term client. A slight smile crossed her face. You planned this, all of it. I planned for the possibility that someone might try to steal my work. The rest, I shrugged. That was all Brent's execution. As I headed for the exit, Sarah caught up with me. Rachel, wait, what happens now? With the framework, who maintains it? Check your email on Monday. Arden Technologies is hiring a small team for framework support, competitive salaries, full remote work, and no CFOs who think they understand code. Her face lit up. Seriously? Send me your resume. You too, I added, looking at the other developers who'd gathered around. Anyone who actually understands what we built here. Walking out of Havenbrook for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. No corporate politics, no rushed deadlines for arbitrary metrics, no executives who thought innovation meant destroying everything that worked. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Ms. Dawson, this is James Chen from Apex Systems. We heard about your framework protection protocols. Would you be interested in discussing similar architecture for our platforms? I smiled and typed back, Arden Technologies is accepting new clients. Our consultation rate is $10,000 per day. The response was immediate. When can we meet? Behind me, through the glass towers of Havenbrook Dynamics, the lights were still on. The framework was humming along perfectly, processing millions of transactions, generating revenue, keeping the company alive. They'd wanted to eliminate the foundation to save money. Instead, they'd paid $5 million to learn a simple truth: the people who build the systems own the knowledge, and knowledge, properly protected, is power. The $251 million Cortel deal would go through. Havenbrook would survive, maybe even thrive, but they'd do it as clients of Arden Technologies, paying monthly rent on the very framework they'd tried to destroy. Brent had called me dead weight. Turned out I was the gravity keeping everything grounded. And now, finally, I was free to fly. 4 p.m. exactly. The framework completed its final compliance cycle and entered permanent stable mode. Every monitor at Havenbrook Dynamics displayed the same confirmation. Operational access confirmed. Administrator Arden Technologies, LLC. Status, fully licensed, all systems optimal. In the boardroom, the emergency session had stretched into its 6th hour. Through my monitoring access, completely legal, part of the licensing agreement, I could see the system logs recording every transaction. Normal, stable, perfect. Margaret Walsh was on a conference call with Cortel Capital's board. Their concerns had evaporated once they understood the framework wasn't just protected, it was bulletproof. No competitor could steal it. No disgruntled employee could sabotage it. Havenbrook's infrastructure was now the most legally protected system in the industry. The irony was delicious. Brent's disaster had actually increased the company's valuation. Cortel approved the full $251 million investment that afternoon, citing unprecedented infrastructure security as a key factor. But Brent would never know that. According to Sarah's text, he'd been escorted out at 2:30 p.m. his company Mercedes keys confiscated, his corporate cards deactivated before he reached the parking garage. The golden boy who'd promised to revolutionize everything had lasted exactly 43 days. From my table at the Coastal Bean Cafe in Santa Monica, I closed my laptop and set my phone to silent. The beach stretched out beyond the window, endless and calm. I'd driven 2 hours just to sit here, to watch the waves while the biggest moment of my career played out in automated perfection. The waiter refilled my tea. It had gone cold an hour ago, but I hadn't noticed. My mind had been elsewhere, watching numbers cascade through servers, seeing years of careful planning crystallize into this singular moment. A couple at the next table was arguing about startup equity, the man insisting that engineers were replaceable, that ideas were everything. The woman disagreed, saying execution mattered more than vision. I almost laughed. They were both wrong. Protection mattered most. Legal, documented, ironclad protection. My phone lit up with notifications I didn't read. Arden Technologies' bank account had just received its first licensing payment, $75,000 for month 1. By year's end, that would be $900,000. In 5 years, $4.5 million. All for code I'd already written, systems I'd already built. The framework would outlive everyone who'd tried to destroy it. It would process billions of transactions, generate hundreds of millions in revenue, become the foundation of Havenbrook's entire operation, and every month, like clockwork, they'd pay me for the privilege of using what they'd tried to steal. I pulled out a notebook and started sketching. 3 other companies had already reached out about similar frameworks. Each would need custom architecture, unique protections, specific continuity clauses. Arden Technologies wouldn't just be a shell company anymore. It would be real, powerful, mine. The sun was setting now, painting the ocean gold and orange. Families were packing up their beach gear. Joggers passed by the window. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a few miles inland, a billion-dollar company had just learned what happens when you underestimate the person who built your foundation. My tea had gone completely cold, but I raised the cup anyway in a silent toast. To Brent Calder, wherever he was, probably drafting his LinkedIn post about learning experiences and new opportunities. To the board members who'd chosen flash over substance. To every executive who'd ever called an engineer replaceable. But mostly, I toasted to Clause 4C, 3 paragraphs of legal text that had turned dead weight into pure gold. The waiter approached with the check, $12 for tea and a croissant. I left a $100 bill and walked out before he could make change. After what I'd just earned, it felt appropriate to spread the wealth. Outside, the California evening was perfect 70 degrees. Light breeze, the kind of weather that made people move across the country. I stood there for a moment, breathing salt air, feeling something I hadn't felt in 7 years, complete control over my own destiny. Havenbrook Dynamics would survive. The Cortel deal would succeed. The framework would run flawlessly for years. But none of that was my problem anymore. I wasn't their architect. I wasn't their employee. I wasn't their safety net. I was their landlord, and rent was due monthly. Walking back to my car, I pulled out my phone one last time. One new message from Margaret Walsh. Thank you for saving the company. Despite everything, we couldn't have built this without you. I deleted it without responding. They hadn't built anything. I had. And now, finally, undeniably, legally it was mine. The framework hummed on, processing data, generating revenue, keeping Havenbrook alive. Somewhere, Brent was probably still trying to understand what went wrong, how his perfect plan had failed so spectacularly. He'd learn, eventually, what every real engineer knows: you can't shortcut solid architecture, you can't bypass good code, and you definitely can't eliminate the person who holds the keys. Not when they've protected those keys with the most powerful force in corporate America, an ironclad contract, and the will to enforce it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Rachel's revenge. Have you ever witnessed someone underestimating the quiet person who actually keeps everything running? Let me know your stories in the comments below.